What if high income makes you a better target, not a safer one? Imagine this. It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're a 34-year-old software engineer based in Chicago. You earn $85,000 a year. You have a master's degree. You've read about scams. You've laughed at those email phishing attempts. You consider yourself reasonably a smart person. Your phone rings, an unfamiliar number. You almost don't pick up, but you do. And 45 minutes later, you've handed over $2,400 to someone you've never met in a country you've never visited for a problem that never existed. This video is not about how that happens to other people. This video is about why it keeps happening to people exactly like you. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is about understanding money, not the motivational version of it, but the real, sometimes uncomfortable version of it. Today we're talking about call center scams, but not in the way most videos cover them. We're not going to list red flags. We're not going to tell you to just hang up. You've heard that. Everyone's heard that. Instead, we're going to go deeper. We're going to look at why the people who are statistically least likely to fall for a scam, educated, employed, financially aware individuals, are increasingly the ones who do. And the answer, when you understand it fully, says a great deal about modern financial life in America and Europe. Let's start with a person, a real type of person, someone you probably recognize. Daniel is 36. He lives in Manchester, England, though his story plays out identically in Austin, Texas, or Amsterdam, or Munich. The geography changes, the financial pressure doesn't. Daniel works as a mid-level project manager at a logistics company. He earns £48,000 a year, a salary that, by most measures, puts him comfortably in the upper middle tier of earners in the UK. After income tax and national insurance contributions, Daniel takes home roughly £3,050 per month. In net terms, he's doing well, better than most. Here's how that money disappears. His rent in a decent part of Manchester, not central but not far either, is £1,100 per month. His car finance payment is £340 per month for a 3-year-old Audi he felt he needed when he got the promotion. His phone contract is $55. Subscriptions, streaming, gym, cloud storage, a meal kit he uses twice a week come to about £120. Groceries, utilities, and internet bring him to roughly £2,900 in fixed and semi-fixed costs. That leaves Daniel with approximately £150 of genuine breathing room each month. Not because Daniel is irresponsible, not because he's unintelligent, but because Daniel built a life that from the outside matches his income, and from the inside leaves almost no margin. Now, here's the part that matters. Daniel is financially stressed, quietly. The kind of stress that doesn't announce itself, the kind that sits underneath a reasonably confident exterior. He doesn't talk about it at work, he doesn't post about it online, but he knows in that low-level background hum of modern life that if something unexpected happened, he would struggle. That quiet, background financial anxiety is not a personal failure. It is, however, a door. And call center scammers have learned exactly how to open it. Daniel's phone rings on a Wednesday morning while he's working from home. The caller introduces themselves as a representative from HMRC, the UK tax authority. The voice is calm, professional, and British accented. The caller tells Daniel that a routine audit has flagged an irregularity in his 2021-22 tax return. There is apparently an underpayment of £1,840. If it's not resolved today, a formal investigation will be opened and his employer will be contacted. Now pause here for a moment. Your instinct right now reading this is probably, that's obviously a scam. And you're right. It is. But notice what happened before your instinct kicked in. You processed the information first. You considered it for even half a second. You ran a quick mental check. Have I had any tax issues? Is this possible? That half second is what the scammer is building their entire operation around. Because Daniel, in that moment, is not thinking like someone watching a YouTube video about scams. He is a person who has had a stressful month, who knows his finances are tight, who received unexpected correspondence from an authority figure, and whose brain immediately shifted into threat response mode. He doesn't hang up. He asks questions, which is precisely what the script expects him to do. The caller has answers. Calm, detailed, plausible answers. They reference his employer's name, available on LinkedIn. They mention the tax year. They offer a case reference number. They tell him he can verify through a website they'll send him by text, a website that looks with extraordinary precision like the real HMRC portal. By the time Daniel is asked to make a payment to pause the investigation, he has been in a state of low-grade threat response for 22 minutes. His critical thinking has not disappeared, but it has been systematically occupied. This is not a story about stupidity. This is a story about cognitive load, authority bias, and the one specific financial condition that makes otherwise sharp people momentarily vulnerable. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called scarcity mindset. It was studied in depth by economists Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, and their findings are genuinely unsettling. When people are under financial pressure, even moderate financial pressure, not poverty, just the ordinary tightness that comes from living close to your income, their cognitive bandwidth is measurably reduced. Their ability to think clearly about unrelated tasks, to evaluate information critically, to resist manipulation, is quantifiably lower than when they feel financially comfortable. In simple terms, financial stress makes you mentally slower in the moments that most require mental sharpness. And this matters enormously because of who experiences that stress. It is not primarily people with very low incomes. People with very low incomes have often developed robust systems for managing scarcity. They are, in a sense, practiced. The people most acutely affected by financial cognitive load are people like Daniel, people earning reasonable salaries who are spending at or near their income ceiling, people whose lifestyle has quietly inflated to meet their earnings, people who have, on paper, no reason to feel financially fragile, and yet feel it anyway. In the United States and across Western Europe, this describes an enormous portion of the working professional population. According to a 2023 survey by PwC, 57% of full-time employed Americans describe themselves as financially stressed. In the UK, similar surveys consistently show that nearly half of adults earning between £30,000 and £60,000 report anxiety about their financial situation. These are not people on the margins. These are the engineers, the managers, the teachers, the consultants, the people who read about scams. And they are falling for call center scams at a rate that has surprised even the researchers studying the problem. The Federal Trade Commission reported that Americans lost over $10 billion in fraud in 2023, a record high. The fastest-growing victim demographic was not the elderly. It was adults aged 30 to 40. The UK's action fraud data tells a nearly identical story. So we have to ask an honest question. If awareness campaigns and fraud warnings are widely available, and the primary victims are increasingly educated working-age adults, what is the warning system missing? The answer is, the warning system tells people what to watch for. It does not address the condition that makes watching difficult. Now, let's put some numbers on this, not to create alarm, but because understanding the real cost of something changes how you think about it. The average reported loss in a call center impersonation scam in the UK is approximately £1,200. In the United States, the average loss from government impersonation phone fraud is around $1,450, according to FTC data. For Daniel, with £150 of monthly financial margin, a loss of £1,200 represents 8 months of surplus. Gone. Not gradually, immediately. But the financial damage doesn't end with the initial loss, because Daniel also, in many cases, doesn't report the fraud. Studies suggest that fewer than 15% of fraud victims report their experience to authorities. The reasons are complex: embarrassment, the belief that nothing will come of it, a reluctance to revisit the experience. This means that the scammer's number is not flagged, the operation continues, and Daniel, having suffered a significant financial setback and not addressed the underlying reason he was vulnerable, the thin financial margin, remains vulnerable to a second contact, sometimes from the same operation, which keeps lists of people who have paid once. There's also a secondary cost that rarely gets discussed. After a scam, many victims describe a sustained period of distrust and anxiety around financial communications. They become hesitant to respond to legitimate tax correspondence, genuine bank alerts, or real utility company notices. The scam has, in a sense, broken their relationship with the financial institutions they actually need to engage with.
This avoidance can lead to missed deadlines, penalties, and a compounding of the original financial stress. A one-time loss of £1,200 can, when you trace its full downstream effect over 12 to 18 months, represent a real financial disruption of 2 to 3 times that amount. And none of that includes the psychological cost, which is real, measurable by researchers, and tends to fall disproportionately on people who consider themselves competent and careful. Because for them, the question isn't just what did this cost me, it's how did this happen to me? That question, unanswered, is its own kind of burden. Here's something worth sitting with. Call center fraud operations, and we're talking about sophisticated, professionally run operations, many of which are based in South Asia, Eastern Europe, and parts of West Africa, are not randomly dialing numbers and hoping for the best. They are running data-informed campaigns. Information about individuals, employment status, approximate income, residential area, outstanding debts is frequently harvested from data breaches, purchased through gray market data brokers, or assembled from publicly available social media. A person who lists their employer and job title on LinkedIn, who has a public record of a property purchase, and whose email appears in even one historical data breach, has likely had a fairly detailed profile assembled about them without their knowledge. The script that the caller uses when they reach Daniel is not generic. It is calibrated. The mention of his employer, the reference to the specific tax year, these are not guesses. They are details designed to make the call feel real because elements of it are real. This is not a story about a vulnerable individual being caught off guard. This is a story about a sophisticated, data-driven operation that has specifically identified the psychological and financial conditions that make a particular category of persons susceptible and has engineered its approach accordingly. Understanding that reframing matters because it shifts the question from why wasn't I more careful to what is the actual architecture of this vulnerability and how do I structurally address it. Those are very different questions, and the second one has actually useful answers. There's a meaningful difference between people who consistently avoid falling for these operations and those who don't. And it has almost nothing to do with being smarter or more educated or more aware of scams in the abstract. It has to do with their relationship to financial urgency. People who are financially grounded, who have even a modest buffer between their income and their expenses, respond to unexpected financial communications very differently, not because they're immune to stress, but because their nervous system is already in a low-grade threat state before the call begins. When someone with 3 months of expenses in a savings account gets a call claiming they owe back taxes, their first instinct is not anxiety. It's skepticism. They have the cognitive space to be skeptical. They're not already operating at the edge of their mental and financial bandwidth. This is the thing that most fraud prevention advice misses entirely. Telling someone to verify before you pay is genuinely useful advice. But if a person is in a financial situation where unexpected demands feel immediately plausible because their margin is thin enough that almost any financial disruption feels possible, then the verification step requires overcoming a stress response that's already been activated. The more fundamental protection is structural. It's building a financial life where unexpected claims feel suspicious by default rather than plausible by default. That means, not as a motivational instruction, but as a practical observation, that the people least likely to be victimized are those who have deliberately created some distance between their income and their spending. Not a great distance, not an unrealistic one, just enough that when an unexpected financial demand appears, the immediate emotional response is, "That's odd," rather than, oh no. Daniel, in our story, spent 3 years building a lifestyle that consumed his income almost entirely. The Audi that felt like a reward, the rent in the slightly better neighborhood, the subscriptions that felt small individually. None of these decisions were wrong exactly, but collectively they eliminated the margin that would have made him structurally resistant to the one moment of vulnerability that cost him £1,200. This is the hidden financial cost that never appears in any scam awareness campaign. Not the individual loss, but the years of lifestyle decisions that quietly removed the buffer that would have made the loss unlikely in the first place. Call center scams are not going away. The operations running them are profitable, professionally managed, and increasingly sophisticated in how they identify and approach their targets. Awareness helps at the margins, but awareness on its own is not sufficient protection. What offers more meaningful protection is this: understanding the conditions under which your critical thinking becomes unreliable and addressing those conditions directly. For most working professionals in the United States and Europe, the most significant of those conditions is financial tightness. Not poverty, just the ordinary, quiet pressure of living at the edge of a reasonable income. The practical implication is not dramatic. It doesn't require a complete lifestyle overhaul or a complicated financial strategy. It requires primarily an honest look at the gap between income and expenditure, and a deliberate, patient effort to create some space in that gap. Because that space is not just a savings fund. It is, in a very real sense, the thing that gives your brain permission to be skeptical when skepticism is exactly what you need. Daniel eventually recovered his money, partially through his bank's fraud reimbursement process. He didn't get it all back. He didn't report it publicly. He told one friend who told him he'd been stupid. That friend was wrong. Daniel wasn't stupid. Daniel was stretched. And in one unguarded moment, someone who understood that very well took advantage of it. The difference going forward for Daniel and for anyone watching this is not about being more alert. It's about being less stretched. That's a harder thing to build, but it's the right thing to build. Subscribe